there is a media perception of what is happening in the country. Again, perhaps because there is not a shared culture and history, it seems more removed from, you know, the UK awareness of what is happening in Mexico, what's going on. But it's interesting, when I give presentations, I always tell people, well, you have UK companies that have been operating in Iraq, which is a much more complex environment, and you know, especially energy companies, which despite the risks, were still going into Iraq because the rewards were amazing. Well, definitely in Mexico we don't have that situation, and the situation is much more benign. So it's important to you know, to distinguish the risks, and to understand that, you know, the situation that we have in Mexico is by no means extreme and is manageable. Another important point that is worth mentioning, and it has been stressed this morning when we were talking about the global economic outlook and Mexico's position in the world, is that the opportunities are there. I mean, when companies come to control risks to understand what is happening in Mexico, the question is not whether I go to Mexico or not. The question is, how do I go to Mexico? And this is very interesting and very important to stress. It's not a question of not investing in the country. It's a question about understanding what is happening in the country and understanding the complexities of you know, the current security situation. As we said, Mexico is a big country. It has, you know, very different security environments. If you take the north of the country to the capital, nothing to do, like very, very different security situations. So it's important to understand that, you know, it's a very localized phenomenon, and it's important to understand, you know, where are we going to invest, what kind of situation is happening there. But overall, you know, if we look at national average murder rate, you know, other countries in Latin America have a much, much worse situation. If we look at the Northern Triangle, such as Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, is the most violent non-conflict zone in the world. And definitely the murder rate is much higher than the one that we have in Mexico. And take a look at Venezuela, for instance, which where it has a crime problematic that is much more complex than the one that we have in Mexico today. And also the important point to stress, as Marta has said, is that although there is a security challenge, it doesn't affect business that much. So this is important to understand as well, that businesses, bona fide businesses, are not a target of organized crime. Organized crime is based on a, you know, a transshipment of drugs, and it doesn't have to do with, you know, having a target on a company per se. So that's another point to stress.
Thank you very much, Irenea. Now, I think that we have some space for questions. I don't know.
I have one question.
Okay, first question. Which measures, I believe this is addressed to Mr. Anguiano. Which measures Lloyds have in respect of possible corruption in big government accounts? Do Lloyds think this happens?
Okay, that's. I knew he was going to throw at me a very simple question. Sorry. Oh, no, sorry. Well, in a way, the Lloyds market has been in a comfortable position in the sense that we in Mexico operate as foreign reinsurers. So the business comes to us through a network of international brokers who ask us to quote on reinsurance terms. We don't get to deal directly with the initial buyers of the policy, which in many cases we're talking about government risk, government tenders. Having said that, we still have a responsibility, particularly in light of the recent Bribery Act. I think it's fair to say that Mexico is not at the top of the concern list. It's definitely much less of a concern in terms of corruption than some of the BRIC economies, and I don't need to mention countries. So it's not top of the agenda. There is a concern that the way government insurance is purchased through the public tender system leads to certain inefficiencies, and essentially the process is designed is the same process whether a government entity is going to buy pens or buy a reinsurance cover for assets worth $100 billion, and that leads to a particular set of problems. But corruption is not normally the one that concerns us. I do have to say, however, that there's also a difference in terms of who in government we are dealing with. At the federal level, particularly if you look at institutions like the Finance Ministry, the view in London is that all risks acquired by that institution are managed in a very, very professional way. Of course, when dealing with some state governments, the quality of the information we get, the process is not the same. So one of the opportunities is for the federal government to filter down some of that expertise in buying in insurance. I think that the bigger problem here is that because of a concern with corruption, the Mexican government has put in an excessive number of procedures to prevent corruption, and those procedures, while well-intentioned, sometimes lead to absurd situations. So I think that's maybe one angle to work on, to continue protecting transparency at the government level without making it too complicated for government to transact. I mean, one example is a claim. If a government entity has a claim and the insurance company, there's a gray area around the claim, and the insurance company puts an offer. It's impossible, virtually impossible, or very difficult for a government entity to accept the offer, however good it is, because that government official runs the risk of being accused of not having acted in a transparent way. So very often that claim will go to court, because the government prefers it to go to court, where an independent entity will say whether an offer is good or not, the claim values are appropriate or not, where that could have been settled long before. But that is a reflection of the inefficiencies that come from trying to combat corruption. So I hope I've answered some of the concerns.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I have a question here for Marta, and I will read it as it is posted. I don't know who is the leading president, leading candidate for president in Mexico that said this, but well, in recent months, the leading candidate for president in Mexico said he is looking for means to force big international companies like Shell to keep profits within Mexico. What's Shell's view on that?
I haven't heard that quote from whichever candidate. We would love to have, in the first place, more opportunities to invest in Mexico. And if an industry like the oil industry invests in Mexico, and we can source goods and services and be like the ones pulling a whole supply chain, many of the profits will by definition stay in Mexico. And apart from that, under the current framework, a company like Shell would only be a contractor to Pemex, so the main profits are made by Pemex. There's sub-remuneration that goes to the contractor. We don't believe that restrictions in capital flows do any good to business in any jurisdiction. So I think we would advocate for cash be free to come in and out, because if you know that your cash is going to be trapped for whatever reason, this doesn't really encourage, or it's more of a minus than a plus.
Thank you very much. I have three more questions here. I presume that they might be addressed to me. One is business extortion is one of the most known financing methodologies used by organized crime, especially for the small and medium business. What exactly is the government doing to protect this sector? Well, extortion is the direct result of territorial control or influence by criminal groups. It's the lack of presence of strong enough state institutions in one particular geography that gives and provides a space for extortion. So the idea here has been, and is as we speak, to provide federal resources to those areas more affected with the presence of organized crime that enable them to challenge the state and, of course, to affect ordinary citizens' lives with extortion. You cannot stop this without the deployment of state forces. If you don't have strong enough state forces, you have to deploy federal forces and provide a space to build up